Hello, folks. Welcome to the Scrum, Politico's weekly podcast. I'm Reed Epstein. Here in the Politico newsroom, we're talking about the big topics in Washington as usual. This week, it's Obamacare, Harry Reid finally detonating the nuclear option, and we'll talk about a time when the Senate was more collegial, except perhaps for all the women who work there. For all of that, we have a great team of Politicos, senior White House reporters Josh Gerstein and Carrie Budoff-Brown, along with senior writer Todd Purda making his debut on the Scrum.
Welcome, Todd.
Welcome, Todd. Before we dig into those topics, let's start with your headlines of the week. Josh, do you want to go first?
My headline for the week is filibuster blown away. What else do I have to say? Do you see what I did there?
I don't know that there's any other headlines to be had after that. Unless Carrie or Todd has one.
I don't have anything that can top that.
I certainly don't either. But that is a good one.
I think we could just end the show right after that.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
From there, we'll go right to the Senate going boom. Harry Reid finally pushed the button on the nuclear option, and we have, it seems like Republicans and what few institutionalist Democrats are there are howling to the moon, reminding us of when President Obama, Vice President Biden, Harry Reid, others, not too long ago talked about how the nuclear option would be the worst thing since American cheese, and now they're all embracing it. So what does this mean?
I think it means that the president is going to have a lot of leeway to send in people to the administration that he wants. It's about as big of a sort of deal for him at this point in his presidency as I think anything could be, just because he can't get anything through Congress anymore, legislatively, of any sort of magnitude. So Harry has an opportunity finally to do some things administratively, set the court that reviews his regulations, set it with a Democratic majority. And, given that he's given up on Congress, this lease gives him returns some power to him to get something done.
Josh, you wrote about what this means for the president's judicial nominees, perhaps a return of Goodwin Liu, among other cast of characters who had been nominated for positions held up or sort of delayed ad infinitum by the Senate. What practically is this going to mean when the Senate comes back after Thanksgiving?
Well, it's going to take, I don't know that right after Thanksgiving anything major will happen. I mean, there are going to be these further votes on the D.C. Circuit nominees that will, it seems, go through unless there's something shocking that happens. But in terms of the next year or so, the president's going to have, again, like Carrie said, I think talking more about the administration positions, a lot of leeway to put people on that might have been too controversial before, including people that he already tried, like Lou, if he wanted to try to do that again, or others who are out there in academia who are somewhat provocative and who would certainly generate a negative Republican response. There are a couple things there, though, that are like asterisks. One is there are still restraints on what he can do. I mean, he's got not a huge majority in the Senate. I think we're at 55 or so, depending how people vote. And so he can't lose that many of those votes, especially from red state Democrats, and still get people across the finish line. And then there are some other arcane things that don't get a lot of coverage that have to do with the power senators have to basically veto or blackball judicial nominations in their own states. And so far, Senator Patrick Leahy, who has the Judiciary Committee, hasn't made any sounds that I know of about rolling back that tradition in the Senate, which is also another way senators can block nominations. So I think you may see sort of an evolutionary change from Obama. Another big asterisk or question is, does Obama really want to put on much different judges than he got on in the first term? And I think we'll find out in the next year or so.
And Todd, this is sort of something that it seems like the majority party in the Senate has been making noise about doing this for a long time. What sort of difference does it make as far as sort of the two sides working together? Are we going to expect to see Republican holds on everything to try to gum up the works in retaliation? Or sort of what's your sense of sort of what the next steps are for the Senate as a lawmaking body?
Well, the Republicans, of course, are outraged. They say they're outraged. I have to wonder if there's not a way in which they're a little bit relieved because it had gotten out of hand. The Congressional Research Service came out with some numbers about how this process has escalated over the years. And Lyndon Johnson faced one cloture vote on a nominee during his entire time in office. Richard Nixon won, Jimmy Carter 3, Ronald Reagan 6, the first President Bush 1. The Republicans began dabbling with this under Bill Clinton when they put 18 nominees to a cloture vote, and then the Democrats tortured 43 Bush with 38. But so far, in his 5 years, Obama's already had more than 80 nominees face a cloture vote. And that's not business as usual for the Senate. And so the rules, in some sense, had already changed. So this change that they voted on yesterday, in some ways, is acknowledging that reality.
And how long is it before this gets extended to Supreme Court judges, to general lawmaking, and the Senate becomes a lot more like the House?
So Chuck Grassley, who's a ranking member on the Judiciary Committee, who in a Republican-controlled Senate would be the chairman, he told the Post, probably told reporters on the Hill yesterday, that when Republicans are in charge, they will not make promises that they won't extend this to the Supreme Court nomination process. And that's a pretty striking remark. And a lot of people think that there's a very thin line right now, fence between legislation and Supreme Court nominations and others that are no longer subject to the filibuster. So I think for the fact that Republicans, maybe it's out of spite today, they're saying, we are willing to cross this line when we are in charge. I don't think it's a very tenuous balance. I think what you could see, and this happens every so often in the Senate, is you have a group of moderates who come together and try to make a fix to the rule. People kind of cooler heads prevail. Something comes along, and they come up with some sort of compromise to fix this rule change. I'm not sure we'll see that happening anytime soon, but because every time they do that, they fall back to their old ways and they end up in the same place. But I think the line is very thin right now.
And is there any sort of sense that anyone cares that the president and Biden and Harry Reid and other Democrats sort of spoke out strongly against this tactic in a past life when Republicans were in the majority, or does that really make any difference at this point, since this isn't sort of a critical bedrock position for anyone? It's much more tactical.
I think it doesn't matter that much because both sides have ample rank hypocrisy that can be exposed on the issue. There are plenty of clips that were circulating yesterday of Mitch McConnell saying every judge should get an up or down vote, which obviously has not been happening for the last several years. So, particularly when we look at that poll that came out that said that most Americans don't even know, or maybe I think it was less than a quarter of Americans know that until yesterday or until Thursday you needed a 60-vote majority in the Senate to get things through if a senator objected. I just don't see it having some significant political impact in terms of people having to pay a price for what position they took on this.
Does it do anything as far as making the president, who sort of seems to, at least in public, make the case that he wants to act in a bipartisan way, getting behind something that is such a political power grab?
Well, the problem was the stalemate was so great that there was very little alternative. But I do think the worst possible thing that could happen for democracy is if the Senate, bad as it is, became more like the House. Because one of the safeguards of the filibuster and of the supermajority to cut off debate in the Senate is it's intended to mean that big controversial things pass with bipartisan support in large majorities. And that's been true throughout history, that most of the most controversial programs of the past 50, 60 years did pass with big bipartisan votes, and healthcare is the big exception, and President Obama is paying a price for that.
I thought it was interesting, too, just how little negative reaction there was on the left when this decision actually went through. Because, you could see some people that are pretty far out there on the liberal wing thinking, look, this is our safeguard that, we're going to need down the road when a Republican president puts up a Supreme Court nominee or other nominees that we don't like, and we probably won't have a majority to fight him, but maybe we could get 40 votes to fight him. And I heard almost no one. I saw Chris Hayes from MSNBC say something like that yesterday, but there was sort of, you could hear a thumbtack drop in terms of whatever room it would be where he was taking that position, because I heard nobody else saying.
Not to mention President Ted Cruz rolling back Obamacare or other social safety net standards. Moving on to healthcare, this week it seemed like there was no new bad news on healthcare for the president after sort of a number of weeks where there was one new thing after another. This week it was sort of the rehash of the existing bad things that we already knew about. So that's probably good for the White House, right? That there's no new bad things on healthcare, only the old bad things?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think they're feeling like there's more positive stories coming out. You have California having the pace of its enrollments pick up. elsewhere, other states experiencing, quickened pace of enrollments. And so I think there's a sense in the White House that I think there's a sense right now that they have to manage expectations about November 30th. I think that's going to be difficult for them because there'll still be website outages on December 1st, and there'll still be people who won't be able to get through, and they'll have to deal with that anecdote by anecdote again, maybe continuing to create the impression that this thing is broken and that's a problem for the president. But talking to administration officials, it's unclear how whether they're going to mark the 30th in any way. Like if they'll try to put a period at the end of this, period they've been in. And it's sort of unclear, I think, at this point, how they're going to deal with next week. I think at this point, they're just trying to manage expectations, saying it keeps getting better. It'll be better November 30th than it is December 1st. But I think they're still in for a rough couple of weeks. And I think it'll get difficult for them for those first 2 weeks because you'll see, more people going on, maybe more problems. I think they're fearful of that.
What do you see, Josh or Todd, as sort of the way out of this? Is there sort of a functional way out of this other than short of sort of fixing the website and having the website work properly, which seems like it's taking a lot longer than they'd hoped or even expected?
Well, I think it's going to involve, like Carrie said, building the crowd of people who say that they've done this successfully. I was reading kind of some of the accounts of John Boehner's attempt to enroll in Obamacare, or I don't know if he really was going to actually enroll, which, he of course made fun of it and said he got an error message or whatever, but, it sounds like he could have gotten through and possibly gotten a pretty good deal as a 64-year-old smoker.
I think they put out that he was enrolled.
He did
Right,
enroll
well,
by
he got
then.
an email saying he was enrolled, but I don't know if he actually is buying the insurance or whatever, but it went through eventually. But, I don't know. Maybe that's some kind of sign that they've sort of turned the corner. There are always going to be these problems, but I think that over time, the stories about Kathleen Sebelius being at an event where they got an error message, they're just getting, while true, they're not that interesting anymore.
I do think one striking thing, the emails released this week by the House Energy and Commerce Committee saying that they were, the testing in the days before it launched, they couldn't get more than 500 people concurrently using the website without it crashing, is astonishing. And the emails, the names on that email, all within CMS. It wasn't affixed to Dennis McDonough's email at the White House, at least as far as we can tell. But I mean, how could that not have raised flags? I mean, that's insanity, right? So I think that's damaging, but it hasn't sort of broken through in a sort of big way right now.
Well, and it's not just that, right? I mean, it's not just that they weren't told, but somebody must have been telling them that everything was fine.
Well, even Todd Park signed off on an email saying, "Great work, team. We're making such great progress." I think like 3 days before, Todd Park being, the wonder kid of
the chief technology officer
of the White House, and it's remarkable stuff.
Speaking of remarkable stuff, Todd, you had a piece this week, Sex in the Senate, sort of looking at what life was like in the Senate in the 60s. And it really it was almost like a sort of fraternity type pranks. Pranks probably not strong enough a word to talk about sort of how things went on there. Bribes and booze sort of flowing freely for votes. Women being afraid to walk past certain senators for fear that they would grab them inappropriately. Sort of talk to us a little bit about how this piece came together, sort of from Bobby Baker's memory, and sort of why he, after so many years, is sort of telling these types of stories.
Well, we really owe the whole thing to the Senate historian Don Ritchie, who 5 years ago approached Baker about participating in the Senate's Oral History Project. And he, then and now, was alive and well and living in Florida. And he came up to Washington and really took a detailed tour of the Capitol for the first time since he was resigned in disgrace 50 years ago, in the middle of a kind of an influence peddling investigation. He had come to Washington as a page in the middle of World War II as a teenage boy from South Carolina, and 20 years later he'd risen to be really the insider's insider, the man who knew where all the bodies were buried in the Senate and the best vote counter, and a protege of Lyndon Johnson, really as close to him as a son. So he had seen the Senate from a kind of, in our business, a copy boy's view of the world. And I think Don Ritchie thought it would be incredibly valuable for history to have these recollections on the record. He'd written a memoir about 30 years ago, but these recollections were even more colorful. In fact, they were so colorful that the Senate decided it couldn't post them on the Senate website, as it usually does with these things. So a few months ago, when I was researching my book on the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Don Ritchie told me that they had this oral history and that I should take a look at it. And when I came to Politico, I showed it to our bosses here, and they thought it would make a wonderful piece for the magazine. And it turned out that it got a lot of traffic.
Tell us, like, what what's the quick and dirty version of sort of what types of things were in this piece?
Not too dirty, though.
Well, for a family audience, I mean, basically,
it's not clear that this is a family show.
But I mean, as you said, there was drinking all day long, trading of money for votes on questions like Medicare or other social and big legislative initiatives, rampant sexism and sexual harassment, I suppose you'd say, or just casual sex between senators and women, whoever they might be. And Baker recounted all this in really kind of stunning detail. He said that one senator, Stiles Bridges of New Hampshire, had died with some $2 million in cash, and that his widow had told Lyndon Johnson, who was then vice president, that he had all this cash and what should you do with it? And Lyndon said, ask Bobby. And Baker said that his advice to her was, don't put it in the bank. The bank is the government. So they'll know that you have it. And we don't really know what happened. And one of the happy consequences of this piece is that you can't libel the dead. So we weren't too worried about that. Although we did, in an effort to be fair, we tried to go and footnote and cast doubt on some of these things when there was doubt to be cast and say, this can't be proved, there's no independent confirmation of this and so forth. But it was pretty rollicking stuff.
And go ahead.
It sounds like you should write that could be like a show.
Well,
Seriously,
I mean,
like
a TV show?
Yeah.
I do think there could be a very good television show about Washington in the 60s in the same way that Mad Men was about New York and advertising in the 60s, because
it has everything.
The other thing the serious question that this raises for me is, it's the one we talk about, it's the kind of a darker side of the nostalgia for a Washington in which people knew each other and trusted each other.
They knew each other in very intimate ways.
Yes, and part of the reason they trusted each other is that they knew each other's secrets and they covered up for each other, and they all knew that they all had feet of clay, so they stuck together in the club to protect that. And I do think there were many more opportunities for trading votes, and I don't think there's any less corruption today. It's just all codified and sort of regulated, and what happens with K Street lobbying is just as pernicious for democracy as what happened 50 years ago, but now it's kind of out in the open, and then it was hidden, and I think that there are ways in which the government functioned more realistically in those days than it does today.
And Todd, do you think that Baker's account also kind of confirms this journalistic theory that, when you hear a rumor, it's definitely true and it's 10 times worse? I mean, we know the stories that came out during that era of, strippers and running through the fountains of the Capitol and this kind of, but it sounds like that was the tip of the iceberg. Yes,
I do think, and my journalistic motto has always been that all rumors are at least partly true. And the other thing is, whatever you think is going on in the White House or Congress, or whatever you think is going on, what's really going on is 15 or 20% worse. And I think that's what that probably does tend to confirm that.
This is a great piece. You should check it out on the Politico magazine, politico.com/magazine. We will take a quick break for some programming notes. We'll be right back with more from our team in the highlights round.
Hey, podcast listeners, nothing on the schedule for next week, but after the tryptophan-laden holiday, on December 4th, we have the final installment of the Politico Tory Burch Foundation and Google partnership, Women Rule. That is Women Rule Marks of Leadership. That'll be at 8 a.m. on December 4th. You can register at politico.com/events. That event will also stream live at politico.com/live. And the following day, we have a pro-energy happy hour. You can check that out and register to be a part of it on politico.com/events. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to the Scrum. I'm here with Politico's Carrie Budoff-Brown, Josh Gerstein, and Todd Purdom. It's time for our highlights round. Let's get some quick takes on some stories this week. First, the family fight at the Cheney house. Liz, of course, is running for the Senate from Wyoming. Her sister Mary said that she's not supporting her campaign, won't go to Christmas dinner with her. Carrie, is this all for show? Is this something where is this concocted that Mary and Liz are fighting in public to the benefit of her campaign, or is this a real thing?
Gosh, I mean, I would hope it's not concocted. That's pretty crazy. I mean, from the stories we had the Politico magazine had a really great story this week about this feud, where the reporter met with Liz Cheney before this sort of spilled into the open over the weekend. And it's so sad, but it really shows sort of the divides that exist right now on this issue, where Republicans are a house divided over gay marriage, and this is like just emblematic of that. And it's sad from a family perspective, but I wouldn't say it's for show. I don't know if any of you guys
Yeah, no, I don't think it's for show at all, because I think it actually reflects a long-standing, more private divide in the Cheney family on the whole question. And one of the things that Jason Zengerle pointed out in his piece in Politico magazine is that in Mary Cheney's memoir, she talks about how when she came out and told her mother burst into tears and said, "Your life will be so hard." And when she told her father, he said, "I always love you and I always will." And that seems to me to sum up the situation we have now. Lynn and Liz Cheney are more uncomfortable with this whole topic than Dick and Mary are. And I think Liz was forced in some ways into this corner by a really nasty campaign in Wyoming of push polling and a kind of a smear campaign that accused her of supporting gay marriage, which I gather privately she never has supported, even though she's been friendly with Mary. So then she went over off the deep end and came out and said, she's so strongly against it. And apparently that really, I mean, naturally enough, hurt her sister's feelings and hurt her sister-in-law's feelings, because they've all, tried to support each other, and they certainly have been an incredibly close family over the years. And one of the things I always admired about them, as a parent myself and as a son, is it's a remarkable situation when two adult children choose to work basically for their father, which both of these women did. And I always thought that spoke incredibly well of Dick and Lynn Cheney's parenting and how they'd raised them, because let's face it, it's, sometimes you want to go to something completely different from your parents for all the obvious reasons.
It just seems so unlike the Cheneys to be feuding publicly. The first story was our old colleague Jonathan Martin in the Times, and the idea of the Cheneys feuding with each other through the New York Times just seemed so unlike them as to be almost unbelievable.
Yeah, it must be, I would think, probably infuriating to some degree to see their family issues played out, particularly, as you say, in the Times. But I do think it's much more of a family dispute than it is a political dispute, in the sense that I think it's been pointed out that, Mary Cheney continued to support plenty of Republican candidates who had the same position as her sister on gay marriage,
including George W. Bush in 2004.
George W. Bush, and I think Romney as well. So, it's something that does seem like they're working out some family issues in a very public way, and that it transcends sort of even the divide that's taken place in the Republican Party on this issue.
Second quick point, Trey Radel, as we know, the freshman congressman from Southwest Florida, became the first sitting member of Congress to be busted for cocaine. Perhaps not the first to do cocaine, as we learned from Todd's piece. He's taking a leave of absence, but so far there hasn't been the chorus of calls for him to go from his party. Is this somebody who's going to be able to hang on, or if nothing else comes out, or is it just a matter of time before he walks off into the shadows?
We are almost in that season when somebody would be wondering why Radel. I don't. It doesn't make sense to me why he's been treated by the leadership in a different way than some of his colleagues who were much more harshly dispatched. He's a very junior member. He wouldn't seem to have any call on their loyalty in a way that has left him supported by them. Obviously, at a human level, he says he's getting the treatment he needs, the help he needs. It's always a tragedy, these situations, but it's hard to see how he just bounces back.
I think that the fact that he admitted he had an addiction and he's seeking treatment, I think that always buys you some time in terms of rehabilitating yourself publicly as well as just personally. I think that leaders are content in giving him that time. He was so. After that, though, I mean, again, it depends on if he's it's a tough road to be in Washington and have an addiction.
think it also depends on whether your case appears to be part of a pattern. If it's a one-off thing, sometimes these things are viewed as more tolerable if there's a sense that the whole party or the whole institution is losing its moral way, then you get treated a little bit more harshly. And in this case, that might mean that if his story is wrapped too closely together with that of Toronto Mayor Rob Ford, then probably the Republicans will see a need to throw him over the side.
As long as no other Republicans get caught, he should be okay.
Right.
And our last thing, Carrie, I know we have a regular discussion about Homeland. So if you're not caught up, now would be a good time to turn the sound down for a couple minutes. But Carrie, we saw last week that Saul, the CIA director, ran to Caracas at the end of the episode. What do we think he's up to?
I actually don't know. I mean, the highlights, I find the highlights for the next week are extraordinarily misleading. I've learned that from the Homeland, previews. So it's hard to discern. But, it's also highly unlikely the CIA director would be in a slum in Caracas. So I had to suspend some of my disbelief there, but I'm enjoying it.
And how about throwing the incoming CIA director out of the meeting with the White House chief of staff? That
he didn't have the security clearance. Get out.
That was a pretty ballsy move.
It was. It felt kind of good. I don't like that character at all.
He's a bad, and even John McCain doesn't like that character. He tweeted a couple of weeks ago that saying that when Saul had locked him in a room, that McCain tweeted that he would have liked to have done that to some senators as well. So, we'll finish up with our shout-outs round. We'll go around the table with quick takes about things you read, things you ate, things you saw on television, nice people you met. We can start with Josh for the first shout-out.
Can we talk about nice drones that we met?
We can talk about nice drones.
I saw on the internet there's some bloggers that posted a picture of what appears to be China's first stealth drone. The U.S. has ones. We've certainly found out because the Iranians got one some months or a year ago. I think it just causes you to reflect a little bit when you see that other countries have that level of technology, that maybe some of the things that the U.S. has been a little cavalier about what are the rules and who's going to decide whether it's okay to take people out with a drone if they're in another country. It gave me a moment's pause in a way that I hadn't really had up till this point, and I wonder if the fact that it's out there will shift our debate over these issues a little bit.
Todd?
I'm in the middle of just starting Doris Goodwin's new book about Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, and the golden age of journalism 100 years ago when the muckrakers were holding people to account and the progressive era was in full flower. And it's kind of an inspiring counter-narrative to our current dysfunctional Washington. And it's told with all the relish that we've come to expect from Doris Kearns Goodwin and her prodigious research.
Carrie?
Debating between two. I'll go with a more personal one. So as a new mother, I'm 18. I have an 18-month-old. I saw this remarkable video on Yahoo of this baby that was born 3 months premature and stayed 107 days in the hospital, and now is this 16-month-old beautiful little boy. And it's a remarkable video of his first year. And I don't know how you would find it because I couldn't tell you, other than it's probably out there because it's gone viral, and it's just a lovely little story.
And I'll finish up. I'm hesitant to advertise this, but Toki Underground, one of the best restaurants in Washington on Capitol Hill, is now serving breakfast at Union Market in the mornings. But the hook is that they serve breakfast starting at 8 o'clock until they run out. And so you have to get there very early. So hopefully this won't impede my strolling in there at 9:30 tomorrow and eating. But you should check it out at Union Market since regular Toki is usually a 2 or 3 hour wait. Carrie, Josh, Todd, thanks for coming on. If you want to find more about these stories, but perhaps not about Toki Underground since we don't have a food section yet, you can head to Politico. You can find us at politico.com/podcast. We're also on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. Just search for Politico Podcast. I'm Reed Epstein. This is The Scrum, and thank you for listening.